Warhammer's turn-based tactics games are as addictive as its lore, and as somebody who has recently fallen into that black hole, I've been hooked. This video will break down those games, give you some of my personal thoughts, pros and cons, and by the end, you'll know exactly which Warhammer tactics games deserve a spot in your library. Not to mention, all but 2 of these games are available on console too. But first, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. I see a lot of people say that they're interested in Warhammer, but more so the games because tabletop is so expensive. However, the games can definitely be expensive in their own right as well. Not $1,700 for one figurine expensive, only the third most by the way. But every one of these games has some form of DLC, which I'll discuss as I go through them. Your money is your money, you spend it how you want, but because of this, I'm going to highlight the biggest offenders first, where I feel the DLC model hurts the experience a little bit. Total War Warhammer really needs no introduction and is a mix of turn-based and real-time strategy, with the massive battles and combat being completely real-time. There is a decent amount of content in the base games, and creating one giant map from all 3 together is honestly very cool, but it's well known that this has a very heavy DLC model with new factions added in regularly, and all 3 games with all DLC at full price, easily running a few $100. There are some things you should know here though. It's all on sale frequently. You can now play the combined giant map by only owning Total War 3, and this is not the same as sci-fi Warhammer 40k, it's the fantasy universe. Gladius is the first Warhammer 4X game. Think like Civilization in the 40k universe minus any sort of diplomacy obviously. The base game comes in at $40 and has 4 factions, the Imperial Guard, Space Marines, Orcs, and Necrons, each with their own mini story quest, which is not long. However, with all the DLC that only adds new units and factions, Gladius balloons up to $200. If you really like the base factions or the world map and combat style of Civilization and don't come in with much deeper expectations than that, this might just hit the spot. In addition, Gladius has full Steam Workshop mod support and hundreds of mods to choose from, so there's that. Warhammer Battlesector is the game if you're a fan of the Blood Angels. At $40, the base game includes a full 20 mission campaign following them during the Tyranid invasion of Baal, with fantastic lore and voice acting, army management, and XCOM style combat on a slowed down larger scale. Custom campaigns, a map creator on PC, Daemon invasion survival, plus a sandbox mode where you can also play as the Tyranids. There's a lot to like here. Unfortunately, while you can play against the DLC factions, you won't be able to use them without shelling out an extra $60 or 15 apiece. Battlesector does include a lot, but being limited to only 2 factions without paying extra kind of cheapens the entire experience in my opinion. DLC balance is somewhat of an issue as well, but the developers are still fully supporting this game with promises of a lot of changes and updates coming. The base game experience is probably worth the $40 for most people, but I would wait for a sale on the DLC, or even better, the whole package. Honorary mention here is Warhammer 40k Tacticus, the mobile experience, and no, this is not sponsored. I was actually surprised at the variety of things to do in the game, but at the end of the day, it is a mobile game with the typical over-the-top monetization model, and as a free-to-play player, I noticed things starting to slow down after about the first week. Not really surprising, but if you enjoy Warhammer and turn-based tactics, it can be a fine little time filler. Do with that information what you will. I do feel like these next ones give a little more bang for your buck, especially if you're into the squad-style turn-based tactics, or XCOM likes as they're called. If you're still with me, drop a comment and let me know your favorite 40k faction and why. Personally, I'm a full-blown heretic that likes the Death Guard, and in Gate Daemonhunters, that's exactly who you're fighting. Gate is the truest XCOM translation of the Warhammer universe, as you'll manage your soldiers, upgrade your ship, research, and fight against a massive plague rampaging across the galaxy. Most of the mechanics here are the same as far as action points, movement, and willpower for psionic abilities, but what I really like is the small tweaks to things like Overwatch, which is great in this game, as well as straightforward damage that is fully explained and broke down so you don't waste actions on pointless attacks. Playing this one at max volume with a full house is fun too. The cultists make all kinds of crazy noises.
You will bleed!
Gate is about 75% voice acted, highlighting the important parts, and the characters fit what they are, an Inquisitor, a Tech Priest, etc. Not to mention the character models and the details on the armor are very well done. But obviously, there are some flaws. The combat action cams and not being able to move your Grey Knights simultaneously can make missions take longer than expected. In addition, some of the maps are very large and require you to fight your way across them, then again for multi-part objectives. Gate is also hard. The situation escalates very quickly, and until you rank up your soldiers or upgrade your ship, you likely won't be able to fully stop all the infection. I mean, you're fighting Plague Marines that are essentially just as armored up as you, and a wide variety of poxwalkers, cultists, and mechanical surprises. The base campaign can run roughly 30 to 60 hours, although most players seem to put a lot more time into it than that. And as far as DLC goes, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. The champion DLC character is fine early game, but not really worth it by the end in my opinion. Duty Eternal adds the Tech Marines, which are a change of pace support playstyle compared to your Grey Knights. The Dreadnought is a great addition to have, but can be costly to repair and is only available for certain missions, which are naturally more difficult. Also, the early missions leading up to unlocking it are a little bit frustrating, as the enemies and mission types start popping up before you have the Dreadnought, and they are tough without it. The second DLC, Execution Force, adds the Assassins, helping to even this out some. They are extremely powerful in the early game. Honestly, I don't think I could have completed the missions leading up to the Dreadnought without them. But although they add some nice wrinkles and variety, neither DLC is required to enjoy the full campaign in the base game, which can be had on sale for as cheap as $15 to $20. If you enjoy the XCOM boots on the ground command style with a splash of force weapon melee, Chaos Gate is where it's at. Now, if you're looking for a deeper, larger scale Warhammer Tactics experience, it doesn't get much larger than Rogue Trader. Charting routes and warp jumping across the massive Coronis expanses, multiple star systems and planets, all while amassing wealth, managing a trade empire, and recruiting companions with a wide variety of backgrounds and convictions. The most well-known comparisons are the Larian RPGs, Baldur's Gate 3 and Divinity Original Sin, with the world building, writing, and character development going deep here. Unfortunately, Rogue Trader is maybe 50% voice acted, mostly the main quests and important conversations, which means there can be a lot of reading. However, the game does a great job sorting out conversations and details with highlighted tooltips that summarize lore and story events briefly, keeping you focused and understanding what's happening around you. Like any decent RPG, Rogue Trader's dialogue options allow you to roleplay as arrogant, heretical, or as dedicated to the Emperor as you want. Although I prefer the iconoclast playstyle, a more level-headed, people-minded approach, it is very tempting to run back another playthrough as a full Agent of Chaos. World exploration is pretty standard RPG stuff with hidden loot, traps, and details you can find if you care to look. Personally, I like the map design. It feels like areas are big, but not so big as to be a chore to explore and run through, and that's another plus. Your characters run all the time, no shuffling around slowly through gigantic areas. Adding on to what Rogue Trader does well, the combat is classic turn-based tactics. Action points, movement and cover systems, and the perfect mix of melee, ranged, and psionics. The Veil Degradation system balances out Psyker spam with the threat of potentially summoning in hostile demons, and the environmental effects during combat when the warp is creeping in are simply fantastic. Story length and time to finish are going to be very different for everyone, depending on how much you enjoy the side stuff and go out of your way, but generally, Rogue Trader can easily be a 50 to 100 hour game. That's without the DLC, which adds a unique new companion I really like, and roughly 15 hours of gameplay. Not bad for the price. Co-op is also available, however, I would warn you that it's more like one player is the Rogue Trader and the other is just there for the ride. I will say that the class and upgrade system is a little redundant sometimes, with a large portion of abilities being non-factors or extremely situational. In addition, while the game starts off fast, it can begin to get slower as you have more things added to your plate, with constant conversation, conflicts, and issues needing your attention. Pretty much every time you warp jump, there's something new to handle. This broke up the flow of the game for me a little bit and makes short, fast play sessions hard to do. The ship-to-ship combat was another thing I thought was interesting at first, but ultimately felt like it was just lacking something. However, the characters, tactical combat, world, and story were enough to keep me hooked and overlook some of the more tedious aspects. Rogue Trader is a game I would highly recommend to any classic RPG fan looking for a game that they can sink some serious time into. Mechanicus will always have a spot in my heart, as it was my first real experience with the Warhammer 40k universe. It absolutely nails the grimdark feel, from the iconic opening cutscene to the amazing gothic soundtrack. It's also likely the cheapest entry into Warhammer Tactics, running as low as $10 when it's on sale. Playing as the augmented Adeptus Mechanicus, you control a squad of tech priests, Skitarii, and servitors in a race to stop the Necron awakening on a tomb world. Time is of the essence, and the results of every mission will determine how much closer to the awakening you get. The story leans pretty heavily on this. There is some dialogue and lore in between missions, but all characters of the Mechanicus speak in a machine language, so while the voice acting is there, you'll still be reading everything. The overworld and ship is pretty basic, making your squad, tech priests, and combat the real backbone of the game. Starting with your priests, there's a lot of flexibility in upgrade paths and skills you can take, allowing you to specialize or be a jack of all trades. The tech priests are obviously the heart of your squad, but as you complete more missions, you'll begin to unlock more powerful Skitarii units to take in with you. Missions are laid out as tomb dives, where you'll take your squad through a procedurally generated Necron tomb with random events and decisions. However, the combat arenas are handcrafted, and there's a lot of cool stuff, like flayed ones climbing up walls and tombs opening mid-combat. Honestly, the environment and arenas are excellent, with a classic turn-based tactics system that has a bit of a twist. Cognition points replace the standard action points and are generated at specific spots during each round of combat. Using these cognition points, your priests will move, attack, and use abilities or items in any order, and this really opens up the possibilities and approach you can take while still forcing you to balance cognition cognition and positioning to generate more of it. The rest of the combat mechanics are a little bit dated and can be kinda hit or miss. There is no cover system and all attacks are made with line of sight, which isn't always as easy to gauge or understand as you might think. Because of this, positioning and turn order are extremely important, something that took me way too long to figure out. And of course, the Necrons have that pesky reanimation protocol, meaning you usually down them first and then finish them off with another attack. As for DLC, Heretic makes some nice additions, including rogue tech priests and new Xenos technology to use. It is only 5 extra missions though, and while it breaks up the tomb diving and pace of the game a little bit, it's not absolutely necessary by any means. I would even say you should play without it first, as the early difficulty curve in Mechanicus can take some learning and getting used to. But one nice feature if you're struggling is the fully customizable difficulty settings and options. Almost everything can be tweaked, and there are permadeath and Iron Man modes available for the hardcore players. At the low price you can regularly find Mechanicus at, it's the perfect value entry into Warhammer Tactics games. Not to mention a great primer for the next Warhammer Tactics game, Mechanicus 2. To hear more about that and why it has the potential to be an amazing game, check out the video on screen now.